Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am delighted to welcome onto the show Mr. Tony Haggerty. Tony Haggerty, welcome to the rip-roaring, free-scoring, never boring Acsom episode. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks for the invite, really appreciate it. I would have said it was getting the band back together, but that's the wrong colour, isn't it? Because it's associated with the Blues Brothers, but there's a feel of that about it, so yeah, happy to be here.
I don't know which one I would be. Ackroyd.
Yeah, Jake Nelwood, wasn't he?
Yeah, I'll go with that. I don't know if I can pull off the dance moves. We're in the heart of the Barras, and you know, when we started This Is Acsom, we spoke about from Barrafield to the Barrowlands, because there's such a crossover between Celtic and the arts, and that's something we used to talk about a lot, Tony. And I had a musician in just last week, Tony Costello of Tijuana Bibles, and we spoke about it back then. Nobody can put their finger on it, but Celtic seems to attract a lot of people who are very creative from the world of music and film and art and comedy, even politics. Why is it, in your view?
I think it's the story of Celtic, because it's a romantic story, isn't it? So it attracts people of that ilk. Now, Billy McNeil was right. There's a fairy tale about Celtic, and I think fairy tale, romance, it's all art, isn't it? It's all a creation in somebody's head, and also the modern day Celtic is credited by starting in 1967. And if you spun the globe and you looked and went, the European Cup winners, kings of the football world, come from there. It's a tiny blot in the landscape, isn't it? How did that happen? Well, let me tell you. And all that team come from what? There. So that's romance, pure romance in a sporting sense. And I think, and also as well, it was one of the few games that was shown on BBC, the World Service. So all of a sudden and after the 1966 World Cup, where you had a lot of live football matches, you had the European Cup final beamed into your home, every home, well, who had a TV in Britain, and all of a sudden Celtic were the talk of the town. They were the toast of kings of Europe.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted to find out how that came about. And that romance, and I think, just lends itself to people from the arts and you know, all walks of life, but particularly music and particularly literature. They're fascinated by it. They're fascinated by that story, because it is a wonderful story, isn't it?
You're right. Imagine pitching to a musician that you want to do some kind of musical around this particular story. It would capture their interest, and it's the same with film. I've often said, like, the genesis of Celtic is cinematic. You've mentioned Lisbon. Why not use that as a starting point in our Celtic discussion, Tony? When you think about that, I think it was McIlvanney who said that it was a Glasgow district select who conquered Europe. And that's part of the fairy tale, isn't it?
That, alongside we won it playing beautiful football, pure inventive football, for me sum up Lisbon and sum up the Scottishness and the Celticness of that achievement. And also there was a great programme called Only a Game that they showed in the BBC in the 1980s. And Jim Baxter said a brilliant thing. Jim Baxter was asked about his thoughts when Celtic won a European Cup, and he said it was fantastic. He said unfashionable boys who'd spun round clothes poles did a number on the catwalk, kings of Europe. You thought to yourself, it just conjures up a picture. You talk about art, that conjures up a picture, don't you, of tenements. So you contrast that, a tenement in any kind of working class community in Glasgow against Milan or Lisbon, you know, and so you talk about that, you see it in pictures, don't you? And that's why I think people are drawn to it from that walk of life. But at that Glasgow District 11 quote from McIlvanney, he is the best sports writer bar none, not just football, but in everything that he did. And I mourn the fact that I never got the chance to meet him. I'd love to have picked his brain about anything, but he'd probably have dismissed me. He'd probably have dismissed me like Chick Murray did to he's playing the piano in Gregory's Girl. Off you go, you small boy. But I would have took that as a badge of honour if McIlvanney had said that to me, to be fair.
It came to my attention as the narrator of the official history video back in the centenary year. And it was just that amazing voice that he had, and you think to yourself, you could narrate just about anything and make it sound interesting. The fact he was doing it about Celtic was all the better.
And his brother interviewed Billy Connolly in that as well, didn't
Yeah, that's when he talked about Bobby Evans.
he? Yeah, Bob, yeah, that was the 10-minute Bobby Evans, and also talking about the centenary of the team that were never beaten. And Billy Connolly turned to Hugh McIlvanney, no, William, wasn't it? William McIlvanney, and said, there was guys saying, hold on, there's a minute and a half to go, we'll win this. This is steady on. But they did, and then Billy Connolly was speaking about the manifestation of 90 minutes don't let go, a game lasts for as long as it lasts, and that's in Celtic's DNA, isn't it? Going to the death, and they've scored many, many goals last minute.
Yeah.
So, I think something draws famous people to Celtic. There's an aura and mystique about the football club. Even Jota felt it when his magnificent Gettysburg Address, when he left the club. He's now back. But even someone like that who grew up in Lisbon and supported a totally different club, came to Celtic and then said he fell in love. And I think people from all the arts, as you talk about, music, literature, call it what you like, they're drawn to this football club, and once you're in, that's it. You fall in love with it for whatever reason. Call it the force. There's something magnetic about Celtic Football Club that once it touches you in any kind of certain way, whether you play for it, whether you support it, whether you're involved in writing about it, as I am, whether you're involved in talking about it, as you are in writing books about it, there's just something about it that once it's there and it gets under your skin, there's no coming back from that. And I've argued with people, you can only support one club.
I agree with that.
If you're fortunate enough that club's Celtic, then you carry that with you for life. During the 90s, every Celtic day I'll tell was a burden. Recently, it's been absolutely wonderful. It's been unprecedented levels of success. And I envy my father's generation who saw them become the kings of Europe. I live for that. It's the worst moment of my life seeing Celtic lose that UEFA Cup final in Seville. And I've often said to people as well, that if somebody was to tell me they would get to the Champions League final in my lifetime but lose, I would say no thank you. But European finals are not for losers. For me, it's not about the journey, it's about the end game. You win the European final if you get there, and losing's not in the equation. People will disagree with that, but it's just the way I feel about my club.
Our discussion is going to veer into the European question, no doubt about it. I mean, we lost last week Evan Williams, one of only 30 players who have played for Celtic in a European final. There are only 16 who have played in a European Cup final for Celtic. There's only 16 who have played for a Scottish club in a European Cup final. And when you mention Seville, people don't like talking about it, just like they didn't like talking about the San Siro.
Yeah.
Milan back in 1970 because we didn't win. And I remember leading up to what happened with, Fergus McCann taking over the football club, Martin O'Neill then coming in as the football manager, and us actually having an aspiration, Tony, to do something on the European stage. I wasn't brought up with that. I was brought up with tales of European endeavours. I've often said it, because of my dad's work, we moved about quite a bit when I was younger. And I landed in Midlothian, of all places. And I remember what you're looking for. It's like being at a wedding, you're just looking for somebody to talk about Celtic, right? So I'm in this school and thinking, I wonder if there's any Celtic fans at this school. And they're obviously all Hibbies. There wasn't many Jambos. It was a Catholic school after all. So it was mainly Hibbies. And a pal of mine, Kevin Causer, comes over and introduces himself, and he's a Celtic fan. You've found an ally, right? It's like when you're on holiday, you find an ally, right? Because of the hoops.
Yeah.
And I always remember him saying to me, oh, you support Celtic? Right, what was the 1967 starting 11? And I couldn't answer him. He goes, you're not a Celtic fan until you can answer this question. So I've gone home and I've got the books and I memorised it that night. The following day I was like, I'm going to tell you who it was. And I'll even tell you some of the Inter Milan players, And it was one of they ones, and it stays with you. So that was folklore for me. European endeavours was folklore. We done nothing in Europe. All the way through my upbringing, my formative years, we did nothing until Martin O'Neill came in. And I think that we probably let the thing run away from us far too far in the distance, Tony, during the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah. Well, there's that golden period from 67 to 74 where Celtic are the best team in Europe, or other than the top 2 or 3. They had that kind of, they won it in 67, they reached the final in 70, and there was semi-final appearances in 72 and 74. Should have won another European Cup, could have, would have, should have, didn't. But there was that golden era from 67 to 74 when Celtic were at the top of their game, both domestically and Europe. And it's no surprise 75 comes along, they don't do the 10. Rangers win the first inaugural Premier Division. And then, bar the 1980 appearance in the quarter-final European Cup against Real Madrid, Celtic as a European entity ceased to be, basically. And I grew up that time as well, and you craved that. I remember going to see Juventus, Ajax, all these teams, Real Madrid, you know, in the space of 3 years. 1980 they played Real Madrid, 1981 they played Juventus, 1982 they played Ajax. And whilst it was great, I thought to myself, when are we going to beat these teams? You know, you won the home leg against Juventus, got popped out. You beat Ajax incredibly, miraculously over there. Lost to, you know, beat Madrid at home, but feared the second leg because, you know, they had great players and ultimately lost.
And a great referee. They would have a great referee, Tony.
Yes, indeed. Santillana, I can still remember throwing Latchford into the net and still being allowed to score. But yeah, you know, so these things stick in your mind. And as you say, there was that time under O'Neill when everybody said when he got to the UEFA final that he put Celtic back in the European map. And now you can see that happening again with the man, and I say it on my own podcast, the Celtic Way podcast, it's a hill I will die on. We have an elite level manager. We had an elite level manager with Martin O'Neill was there. We have an elite level manager with Brendan Rodgers. And I'm not just talking about results, I'm talking about the way he improves players, the way he talks to players, the way he handles himself in the media, from top to bottom, and the way he's all over everything at that football club in a football sense. He is the best manager this club could possibly have at this moment in time. But like you, your ambition, you know, you crave more, don't you? Domestic dominance is brilliant, but as I say, we've had an unprecedented era of success. But I want more. I want it to coincide with doing what we did in Europe there. And I want us to improve next year. Got to the playoff round. Can we get to the last 16?
Yeah.
Can we get to the last 8? That's my but that would be my ambition, and I think it will be Brendan Rodgers' ambition for as long as he's there. You put that up. You don't disclose it publicly to anybody, but you say to those players, you are good enough to be in this stage. Now we go again, and it's up to those upstairs to match the ambition of a manager who clearly has unfinished business at this football club.
Yeah, I think it would be great to talk about the first coming of Brendan Rodgers and the second coming of Brendan. And you use the term there, elite manager, and when you use this, when you're talking on the Celtic Way, you'll probably get the same kind of comments that we get when we use that term. People don't like it, right?
No, they don't.
And they can debate all day about whether or not someone is an elite manager or not. So I changed tack a couple of weeks back and I started calling him a Champions League manager. And people don't like that. Although Celtic fans like that, because if you're a Champions League manager, it shows that I think you're matching the ambitions of a great deal of fans. You don't speak for them all. It's only some people are quite happy just, and I use that word loosely, with domestic dominance. But there's nothing wrong, if you ask me, to looking forward to progressing in Europe. Now, there was the folklore, and we'll talk about the fact that kind of set you up for a fall because it was so good. I always go back to the stat from 64, European Cup Winners' Cup, semi-final against MTK Budapest, up to, right, so 13 seasons, right? Celtic got to at least the quarter-final of European competition 9 times in 13 seasons. Now, so when you make the statement, Celtic were the best team in Europe, I agree with you. They might have only won it once, Tony, but it wasn't a one-off. It wasn't an anomaly. We were there or thereabouts over a period of over a decade.
Yeah, you're talking about reaching the latter stages of European competition. And I know the game's different now and all that, but and that's the romantic in me, that's the artist in me, the saxophone player in me, musician. I want that back. It might be an impossible dream, but there's nothing wrong with striving for it, is there, as a supporter? And I think the current manager thinks that too. There's nothing wrong with striving for it, to be that club that's thought about in that sense, in that arena, because we have the infrastructure. I get we don't have the TV deals and we don't have the money, but if Celtic can push our envelope to the nth degree as far as a club of our stature and financial parameters can, you will be the best representation of yourself, and you will be able to attract a certain calibre of player who will get you into the last 16 of the Champions League, the last 8. Because see, when you do it once, you get to what Celtic did this season, and you start to hover around, the door gets kicked in. But that's something that, it's not good telling Celtic fans they've got X amount of million in the bank. They want that given to a man that they trust. Now, took a while, but they trust him now.
Again.
Because I think they were bruised by the events, the way he left the first coming, because they hung on to his every word. He was as close to a managerial messiah that they've had since the days of Steen and O'Neill. He really was.
And he was sculpturing his statue.
Yeah, they were. And
invincible trebles.
And I don't blame him for leaving. He left to go to the self-proclaimed biggest league in the world with budgets that are astronomical. And he won the FA Cup with Leicester. He took them to 2 top 5 finishes, won the Charity Shield with Leicester, and he got to the semi-final of a European competition, i.e. the Europa Conference League. He did not relegate
that man,
Leicester.
Mourinho again. That man, Mourinho.
Yes, he did.
Ended the dream.
Did from Roma. He did not relegate Leicester. Granted, he parted company with the club when they were, I think there was 10 games to go and they've fallen into the relegation zone. But he did not relegate Leicester. Probably would have kept them up had they kept them on. But they were heading for trouble and they pushed the panic button, and Brendan was a casualty in that. So there's been a rewriting the history about somehow that he failed at Leicester.
They changed their approach as a club, Tony.
Yeah, correct.
As well.
And left him a bit high and dry.
Yep.
Downsized. And not many clubs downsize when they're in the self-proclaimed greatest league in the world and have hundreds of money.
And on the ascendancy.
Yes. So that narrative has been skewed that he was a failure at Leicester. You and I know the truth. But it was just the way he left. And he even said it himself when he came back. I think he underestimated this depth of feeling that the Celtic supporters felt for him personally. And also he said when he came back the second time, he said he hurt family members who told him. And he was here to right wrongs. And my goodness, he's done that. I mean, the first bold statement he made when he walked outside, "I'll see you in May." There's a man who's comfortable in his skin, who knew fine well, I'm going to win this title. Watch me do it. He's
made a commitment and he's made it publicly.
Yeah. And he said, "I'll be here 3 years unless I'm emptied." Glasgow parlance. He'll not be getting emptied, will he?
No.
In fact, right now, it would be churlish of Celtic not to be sent him behind the scenes. And I know he's batted it aside and he keeps saying,
I'm hearing it's already been dealt with.
It wouldn't surprise me if it's already. And I wrote a piece in the Celtic Way the other day saying he will sign a new deal. Bookmark it. Because he's in a happy place.
Yeah.
And the people... And there's a great footage of Jock Stein who's talking. And I wrote this the other day as well, funnily enough. And he's talking, and it was all a myriad of things. He's talking about the Partick Thistle defeating the League Cup final and how Celtic, he primed his players to, accept that they could get beat in a game because that day they were guilty of just thinking they could turn up and win. And then Jock Stein goes on to say, as long as he was there, he was happy and happy in a good place, and he liked the people, and he likes making the people happy, and as long as he was there, he was egotistical enough to think they could be relatively successful. I think Brendan Rodgers is the same boat here. I think as long as he's there and he likes making the Celtic supporters happy, he feels that there's a high percentage that Celtic can be relatively successful and rack up silverware on his watch. Because, go back to it, he's an elite level manager.
Yeah. And, I think the two reasons and if I ever get the opportunity to have a proper chat with him rather than press conference kind of style, that he came back to the football club, I would ask him if this is true. I think the first one is unfinished monkey business.
Yeah.
Right? There was a legacy there to repair. And the second one, because he didn't do this first time round, was European progression.
Yeah.
And if you were ever to, be ultra critical of his first spell, it's difficult to criticise what he'd done domestically, Tony. But on a European stage, we didn't really, there was a couple of memorable performances, but we didn't really do it in Europe.
But you listen to him now, and he tells you that. I always say, one of the great things about Brendan Rodgers' press conference is you have to listen. You have to connect dots, join the lines and all that, and I always mention that too when I speak. But some of it's subtle, some of it's not. But we're talking about Celtic weren't ready then, which is why their European record was ropey.
Mm-hmm.
They are fully equipped now, which is why his ambition is just, it's, like Shakespeare said it of Macbeth, it was vaulting ambition. I think Brendan Rodgers has a vaulting ambition for to see Celtic at that level, or to be at the highest level and the best representation they can be in that European arena. And that's what he wants for the club. And it's not signing £20 million players. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being prudent, living within their financial means, but pushing the boundaries of what you're, how far are you prepared to go to turn a playoff into a last 16 or a last 8? Because the financial rewards come if you get to those prestigious stages of European competition. And I look at European football just now, it's not out with the realms of possibility for a club like Celtic, is it? They go to the Allianz Arena, and I don't know about you, but that's one of the best Celtic performances I've actually witnessed. And I was there as a working journalist.
What words continually was used after it to describe the performance? Proud. Celtic fans were proud of that performance.
Yeah, and people were saying about Kasper Schmeichel made 8 saves. That's his job.
You're coming across all Roy Keane on you here.
But it is, isn't it? It's like,
we had 5 chances beyond the goal that was scored. 5
guilty
absolutely brilliant chances, not just a 20-yard speculative effort from someone coming in. These were 5 chances that, dare I say, right, had we bought a striker in January, Tony, and this is a big question I'm going to ask you, would it have made a difference?
All ifs and buts and maybe, but
because Kyogo's gone,
Yeah, get it. And but Maeda's got a header as well, which he gets no purchase on.
Mm-hmm.
But that says to me how close Celtic ran Bayern, and I hate the tears for souvenirs element of it. Celtic are out of the Champions League, but it tells me that it's not an unreachable goal to go to the next stage, to get to the last 16, and even progress further. And I think the manager was convinced that night. You saw some people really grow on that stage. Arnott Engels, for example, £11 million, the highest outlay Celtic have ever had for a player. He's 21. He's starting to boss football. I mean, like really boss them.
Yep.
And
was he no man of the match again this midweek against Aberdeen?
He was. And shone like a beacon in the Allianz Arena. And this is a guy who still has a lot of raw and rough edges. And I'm thinking, but that elite level manager's improved him since he wasn't playing in the League Cup final against Rangers to now. And everybody was questioning, why is an £11 million player not starting against Rangers at Hampden in the League Cup final? Comes on, sets up Kuhn, and I don't know if you noticed last night, his set up for Jota was the exact same as what he did at Hampden for Kuhn. Should have been the winner. Crazily it wasn't, but he's got an uncanny knack of doing that. He's a very unselfish player, but he sees it in pictures. He sees, because he could have scored last night when he was played in. He could have gone for a goal himself, but very unselfishly laid it off because he thought his teammate was in a better position, i.e. Jota, who sclaffs it into the net off one foot off the other, but it still went in.
That's a tight make.
Correct. Well, he'll tell you it was. But so these small building blocks that Brendan Rodgers is thinking, how far can we take it? And then he's going to go to those upstairs and say, I think I can take it here with this. Would you be prepared to let me try and fulfill that dream? Because I know they'll never get back to that 1960, 70, 74, golden period for Celtic in European football, world football, bordering on European domination. But you've got to aspire to it. You've got to aspire to go as high as you can. And as I say, I'm probably the worst, because I am the eternal, hopeless football romantic. But it's where I see Celtic.
Tony, if you were to ask a fan or a pundit in 1963 or 1964, or even in 1965 when Jockstein takes the job, whether or not only could we become a force again in Scotland, but we could actually conquer Europe, every single person, to a man, because it was mainly men watching Celtic back then, I wasn't being sexist, would say no chance.
Right.
And I've spoken to people who are old heads, historians of Celtic, authors of Celtic, and they'll tell you that. Celtic were nowhere near it. Now, I know the game has completely changed, but I was having a discussion this morning in relation to English football, which is a destination for many of the players that we develop. And I've not got a great interest in English football these days, Tony. In terms of my old school, right, I was Shoot, Match, Roy the Rovers, Celtic View, Not the View. That was my reading, that was my library.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And at that time, because you were being fed a lot of English football, Brian McClare had signed for Manchester United, McAvenny was down there playing for West Ham, Dalglish obviously at Liverpool. You had an interest. And then the Panini sticker album meant you knew all the players, even Oxford United players. You knew them all, right? My interest has waned massively in that respect, and I think the plastic nature of the money league, if you like, has probably affected that. I could tell you that now I'm aware that the two Manchester teams aren't doing well. I'm aware of that, although I don't have a great interest. And I'm aware that Liverpool probably win the league. That's as much as my knowledge goes. So it was a surprise to me when I looked at the English table for some reason or other recently, to see people or teams like Brentford and Bournemouth doing really, really well. Nottingham Forest. Could that be an indication of how the financial fair play rules are going to affect some of these clubs who are basically just chucking money at every problem?
It gladdens your heart to see that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It gladdens mine. Again, I always say football is for the romantics. So to see the likes of Nottingham Forest up there.
We should have had a wee candle there, because we're a pair of football romantics, We could have had a wee meal.
And
Lady in the Tramp.
moment, yeah. With the spaghetti, yeah, indeed. But yeah, and the reason you got interested in English football growing up was because Liverpool and Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa won a European Cup 6 years in a row. It's the longest it's been in any one country. Right? England holds that record. 6 years in the spin. Real Madrid in the late 50s, early 60s held it 5. There was the 3 Bayern Munich wins in a row at Ajax. Followed on from Feyenoord, so that was 4 in Holland. But that's the longest it's ever. So as a kid growing up, English teams were always in a European Cup final, which is one of the few games that were shown live on the telly back then. So you were naturally interested in England. I think King Kenny, everybody had a soft spot for Liverpool, but again, I go back to it. I didn't support them. I liked them, but I didn't support them. Loved Brian Clough, and I loved that Forest team. And then Aston Villa came along, and you're like, wow, where did they come from? And playing a brilliant brand of football and won it. And whilst you were pleased to see them win it, it would be nothing compared to what you would feel like if Celtic got to that level and reached a European Cup final, a Champions League final, and you got a sense of it in the UEFA Cup. So, but yeah, going back to the point about financial fair play, it's going to have a big effect on these clubs. There is a possible, I'm not saying it, but a slightly kind of levelling of that playing field.
Yeah.
Possibly. And so, what did you notice back then when you were growing up? Lots of teams, no team dominated, certainly in England. The trophies are spread out in terms of, look, Liverpool would maybe win the title, but you did have like one season wonders like Aston Villa and Forest in terms of winning the title, and then Forest transferred that onto Europe. Aston Villa transferred that onto Europe, but traditionally Liverpool were the dominant force, and then the 90s came along, and Manchester United, under the elite level manager of all elite level managers, the most successful manager ever, and Sir Alex Ferguson. But again, someone who had learnt at the feet of the guy who was called the greatest manager this football club's ever had and ever will have, Jock Stein. So it's no surprise that he was a success with Manchester United, because he challenged that duopoly of Celtic Rangers with Aberdeen, and he did it really successfully, where it was second nature for Aberdeen to come to Glasgow in the 80s and win. And you were like, what's happening here? And then Jim McLean too, with his Dundee United team, cut from the same cloth as Ferguson, you know, and built two cracking teams. And I think back then, and I've said this before, I think a lot of the kind of rivalry dissipated between Celtic and Rangers then, because they more to worry about than themselves and each other. They had these other teams. And I think that's what's maybe happening in England now. They've got more to worry them now. There's other teams who, with access to an abundance of riches, are spending it more wisely than some of the richer, more powerful clubs. Just because you buy, you know, just because you spend exorbitant amounts of money on footballers doesn't guarantee they'll be good. Whereas clubs like Brentford and Nottingham Forest are a bit more prudent. They will get more bang for the bucks that they're spending. And, you know, my thoughts, you buy good players, you have a good football team. Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we'll touch on, you know, the recruitment side of the football club, as well as the development of youth within Celtic. When you look at the 80s then, Tony, I'm grown up during that period. First game, 1987, but doing a lot of this with hindsight. As you say, you've got the emergence of the new firm. You've also got Hearts, who pushed Celtic to the last day in 1986, and then went on a really decent run later on in the 80s in the Cup Winners', was it the Cup Winners' Cup? UEFA Cup.
Yeah, Bayern Munich put them out.
Bayern Munich, yeah. And
John Cohen wishes a sitter in the Olympic Stadium, which would have put them through.
I know. So I think that when you're looking at Scottish football as a whole, very, very strong. But then debt comes into Scottish football. It's introduced by Rangers. It was ultimately to be their downfall, Tony, right? But money equaled success domestically. And that is what we've just been talking about with the English game. When they're able to throw money at it, basically, if you were to look at the spend against the league placing, it's pretty much the same, right, over the last, let's say, 20 years. But the way Celtic are doing it now hasn't been just chucking money you don't have at a problem. The way Celtic have done it, and certainly in Scottish football terms, has been unique in that, yeah, we're absolutely wadded, by the way, but that's through financial management over a generation, Tony. Not just 2 or 3 years, a generation of good financial management. And it starts with Fergus McCann.
Yeah.
That's ground zero with Celtic.
Yeah. Because you are minutes away from the plug being pulled on you.
8 minutes?
Yeah, something like that. 8 minutes from the bank foreclosing on you. Yada yada. We all know the dark history of how close it came.
Was that before your journalistic career?
Just before my journalistic career, I was, where was I? I would be at university. Yeah. Strathclyde. Yeah, doing English and politics, funnily enough. There you go. Yeah, just before. And he set the template for Celtic never to be in that position again. Told everybody, this club will never be in that position again. And he put the mechanism in place where we would be a sustainable and viable business as well as a football club. And he emphasised business side of it. And I know lots of Celtic fans jump up and down and say we should open the business arm of it and just go gung-ho. It's why we don't. Because you came perilously close to not having a football club.
Yeah.
Back in those days. And it's the foresight of someone like Fergus McCann to come in and put those machinations in place where you will exist and exist forever. And Celtic are still those principles and business practices that he put in place are still being adhered to this day. And whilst you can argue the toss about Celtic being frugal and stingy at various parts of their history since Fergus McCann has left, you cannot argue about the business side of the operation, which they're a well-run football club, and they are the envy of a lot of football clubs across Europe. The envy.
And across the city, by all accounts.
Well, across the city, they would kill to be an organisation like Celtic, and that doesn't come about through chance or luck. That's come about through years and years of hard graft and getting Celtic to the point where they can produce every other financial report being their best financial figures ever. And it's good news week in terms of the business side of the company, but there's a lot of pain that Celtic had to go through to get to that stage, Paul. And I can understand when, you know, some things are too rich for Celtic's palate in terms of the recruitment policy. I get that, but I'm gradually seeing a sea change with this manager. £11 million is something I thought at any other time in Celtic's history they would have balked at. You know, they lashed out £8.5 million on Adamida, rising to 9.5 if certain targets are met. You know, this is a club to me that still under this manager has huge ambition, and he is being backed. You know, so the striker in January, I think upped him, but I think he thought he knew that they had enough to win the title, but I think he was also thinking longer term, and they couldn't have given any better account of themselves against Bayern Munich. It's those goals either side of half time that done for them at Celtic Park in the end, isn't it?
A great friend of mine, Stevie Mullen, you'll remember him from the Celtic State of Mind, chatting to him this morning on my way through to Glasgow, and he pointed out something really simple. We lose a goal in the last minute of the first half, the first minute of the second half, and the last minute of the entire tie, and it's these margins, Tony, right? So you switch off and you will be punished at that level. You switch off and leave Harry Kane at the back post, he will score, he'll punish you. And we switch off near the end of the tie where it's almost going into extra time. You mentioned you were over in Munich, and I want to talk about the relationships that you've had with Celtic managers. So that here's a young boy who comes through as a Celtic supporter, and they go through that whole indoctrination. And I would like to touch on that as well, because everybody's got their own story. And then eventually you get that opportunity in a professional sense to actually speak to people who play for the football club you love and manage the football club that you adore. And you're doing it in a professional way. So let's talk about relationships in terms of the managers that you have worked with as a journalist. Are we talking Neil Lennon?
Neil Lennon, yeah.
Was he the first?
Yeah, he'd be the first, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll start off with Lenny, because Neil Lennon had European success at Celtic, and he did so in a slightly different way to, let's say, the way Martin O'Neill approached it, which was buying ready-made players with big Premiership wages, to the Gordon Strachan approach, which was very successful. 2 last 16s with Paul Telfer and Gary Caldwell and Steve McManus. Incredible achievement.
Yeah.
And then the Lenny approach. So let's start with Neil Lennon then, because obviously you're dealing with him. Sometimes you're going to have to be asking difficult questions. You've got to.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was Lenny like for you in terms of Celtic, a rookie Celtic manager coming in with his first job and what he achieved at the football club, and he starts the 9 in a row. He starts that era.
I can't speak highly enough of Neil Lennon and my dealings with him. I've always got on well with him. I don't know. You kind of make it your job to try and get along as well as you can with people, but you know fine well at some point you're going to have to ask those difficult questions. The rules get broke, they get bent, but you know, nobody gets hurt, as they always say. But I think Neil Lennon always had a healthy respect for the job that we did, which is why he's such a successful pundit. He's a terrific pundit, you know, and he's got so much to offer as well. As a manager, he should be back in the technical area. Somebody should be looking at what he's got to offer. But
where does he sit then, do you think, in Scottish football? I mean, listen, Hibs almost pulled the trigger earlier on this season. Is that a good fit for Neil Lennon?
I think you canvass any Hibs supporter and they loved his tenure there. They thought he was he did a great job, and they liked him. And you know, I've always there's a high intelligence with Neil Lennon. There's a high emotional intelligence as well. He understands everything about football, subtle nuances, and you know, when he, by definition, Neil Lennon attracts an opinion of him, regardless if you know him or you don't. But see, when you're in a professional capacity with him, there's very few that are better in terms of answering questions. He never shucks a question. Would answer you honestly. And the trade-off was that is that all he wants is for you to portray his words, the way and write them down, the way he said it, and in the manner in which he said it. And I've said this before, and I've never really found that difficult with contacts and people. You know, when you speak to them, you know how they speak. And even on the phone, and John Hartson said to me the other day, I could speak to you all day because you always write down exactly what I say, and I kind of burst out laughing, and I went, well, I can't speak for anyone else, it's just the way. That's probably why you still speak to these people after X amount of years. You know, there's journalistic contacts that are more than 25 years old. I can still lift the phone to, because I take a pride in that, and it's not something well, it probably is something I worked on per se, but not consciously. But
So it was a natural.
yeah, I always just feel that if someone is kind enough to give you your time, then the least you can do is write down what they said accurately. You know, and I say it's always been a rule of thumb of mine as a working journalist. So I've never found relationships difficult. I don't, maybe to my detriment, but I don't remember falling out with it. And I mean having a real, you know, I've had a couple of cross words with people. I've never had, like...
There's never been a Billy McNeil versus Jeremy
No,
McNeil.
I've never been banjoed or anything like that.
Jim McLean versus John Barnes.
I've never had that badge of honour. You know, I've had the mate treatment from Ange when I asked why Celtic were flat at Easter Road.
Talk us through it. Don't come on, I was going to get to Ange.
Even then, he asked me, Celtic drew 0-0 with Hibs, if you remember, at Easter Road, and they weren't great. But, so he was talking, and then I said to Ange, I asked him, I said, I felt your team were flat today. And he stopped me and went, where did you watch the game, mate? You know, so you're like, well, you know. I said, in the press box. He said, it figures. So then he started talking about there was only one team trying to win the game, this, that, and the next thing. So when the press conference finished, or the aftermatch finished, I walked towards him and I said, I wasn't trying to be funny there, and I said, educate me then, tell me what I'm not seeing. And he went, I thought I just did. I said, yeah. I said, that's fine. I said, but everybody else heard that. I said, I want to be a better journalist. Always I strive to be a better journalist. This is taking place in the kind of foyer corridor bit of Easter Road. And I went, what did I not see there today? And he just kind of looked and he spoke to me about, you know, tactical things. He spoke to me about other things that he tried, and then he was like, did you not notice this? Did you not notice that? And I said, yeah, I did. I said, but clearly I never took it on board as, you know, he said that Celtic were always in the ascendancy in that game. I said, well, I maybe beg to differ. Either side could have won it. And I said, fine. And so we spoke for about a couple of minutes, and I went, thank you. I said, I've learned something. I said, I will now apply that to my journalistic practices in games moving forward. And he was brand new. He was like, all right, mate. And then he kind of went, sorry about being snippy. I said, I wasn't having a go. And then I think, I'm sure Ian Jameson was there beside him, and Ian Jameson said, no, Tony's a good guy.
So look at the colour of his trainers.
Yes.
He's a good guy.
He says, no, Tony's a good guy. So I think he kind of got the drift from that, where my leanings lay, you know. So, but as I say, I've no qualms about that if managers want to dig you out in front of people. It's, you know, you write enough, I won't say criticism per se, but you know, you're asked to be objective as possible and balanced as possible when you're writing about, and people say, is it particularly more difficult when you're writing about the football team that you love and you support? I don't find it so.
This is a big thing, and we'll touch on media and how it's changed, obviously, since you made your introduction, Tony. But being critical of something that you absolutely love isn't being negative, right?
No.
What it is you're saying, if we look at that Hibs game at the weekend that we lost at Easter Road, 2-1, there's reasons we lost it. So you are able to highlight those reasons. You can be critical of players' performances. You're not doing it for sensationalism.
No.
You're not doing it to be negative, or you're not doing it to have an agenda against a particular player. See, when you became a journalist, was it difficult for you to remove the emotional element of being a Celtic supporter? And let's be honest, there will be Celtic fans and have been Celtic fans in the mainstream media, but I think Scottish media has a reputation, certainly among Celtic fans, as being, or having a tendency to have the blue tinted specs on. I mean, I'm thinking about, like, the Saddam Hussein / Fergus McCann headlines, and the thieves headline down in Newcastle, and it went on and on and on in relation to blank check and all this kind of stuff. And it was definitely geared towards, the worst was sending a hearse up to Celtic Park, RIP.
Yeah.
That was the worst headline I've ever seen. So there was this tendency for it to be sensationalised in terms of creating a negative story about Celtic. But you were in there, you were in the belly of the beast, Tony.
I can assure you my specs are green tinted, as you can see.
And the shoes are green and white.
Yeah. It's funny because I was what?
Mind the blazer when we went into London.
I was 20 years at the Daily Record, and most of the time I didn't cover Celtic or Rangers. I covered Hearts and Hibs for a long time, Kilmarnock, Motherwell, Dundee United, those kind of clubs. But I never ever had where my leanings lay, because I didn't see the point. And I wasn't one of these guys who say, I'm a Celtic supporter, but I'll carry on, I support Partick Thistle, or wave a flag of convenience. Everybody knew who Tony Haggerty supported when I worked for the Daily Record. And a lot of the time, and I don't mean this is kind of to walk away with that, I was reading those negative stories at the same time as you.
Yeah.
Because I would come in, Tony, you're dealing with Hibs or Hearts, fine. I was locked into those clubs. So whatever was happening, Celtic and Rangers, others were dealing with it. And I would pick up the Daily Record the next day, see the thugs and thieves the same as you. My goodness. Because I'm not privy to who wrote what when I leave the building at night. And that's not a cop-out, that's just the way it was. I would come in, I would do the job to the best of my ability, and then leave, and then, there'd be all sorts of phone calls happening, at whatever time at night, and I wouldn't be privy to them. And so a lot of the time when I went to my work in the morning, I would see the Thugs and Thieves headline and headlines of that ilk at the same time as the ordinary working man was buying his newspaper from the newsagent as well. Sometimes I would look and up there, just like, and I would be aghast as well. But I think certainly the Thugs and Thieves one did for a lot of the Celtic supporting Daily Record readership, because it's one thing to be critical, cast a critical nature in the eye of a football match, and pick on individuals, players for their performance and all that. It's another thing to actually pin a label like that on them and question their character and be personal, and I was surprised as any that headline was okayed. As I say, I wasn't involved, so and people say, but you were there, but I was there, but I just wasn't involved in that kind of stuff, because I genuinely, you would come in and, there was a kind of, let's say there was a hierarchy, but there were certain people would deal with certain clubs, and certain prominent journalists were assigned, to deal with Celtic and Rangers on a daily basis. So every now and again, as I used to say to my father, they would toss me a spangle and say, right, you go up to Celtic Park. And I think I was prevented from doing that because I would enjoy it too much. I covered 3 Celtic Rangers matches in 20 years at the Daily Record. 6-2, 3-0, 3-0. Played 3-1, drew none, lost none. And it soon became apparent there was a bit of a good luck charm for Celtic in terms of Celtic Rangers matches. So I don't know if somebody saw that and stopped it. It was just very arbitrary, and you're going, so. But the 6-2 game was just something that will live with me forever.
It's incredible that you can describe a game with the scoreline. Everybody knows what you're talking about. The 4-2 game.
Yeah,
the 6-2 game.
Yeah,
everybody knows the game you're referring to.
And I remember at one point, I was so locked in to that. I did the man by mans, and I did the Chris Sutton spread after it, as it was known. And I was so proud of that. And every time you write something, you think it's great, but yada yada. And I remember at one point, I think Larson had scored to make it 5-2. And I was just, my face was just like, and somebody smacked me in the back of the head. Can't remember who it was. Somebody in the press box. And I turned round and they went, "You're allowed to enjoy it." I had to crack a smile the whole time. I was just so intense, right? And I'm thinking, they're not going to lose this now, are they? They're not going to lose this. And so you were kind of, whatever team you were assigned to, whatever assignment you had, you really well locked in. And I didn't exist in a vacuum. Helicopter Sunday was one of the worst days of my journalistic career. And Ian Scott, who was the sports editor, Scotty as he was known, he sadly passed away. Great guy, big Rangers man. And I've written a tribute to Celtic winning the title on Helicopter Sunday. Mm-hmm. It's all written, and Helicopter Sunday happens, and he walks around the desk, and he's delighted his team have won the title, obviously, and he puts his head on my shoulder and he says, "You know what I'm going to ask?" I said, "I know." And he went, "I don't care how long it takes you. He said, we're here till it's done." I said, "Okay." He said, "Right." And so I was there till midnight or beyond. They kind of writing, 10 games that won the title, month by month, all in a Rangers sense, And as I left, he just looked at me and he went, "I won't forget that." And he went, "And we'll say no more about it." And I was just like, no bother. And, so you have to be as professional as you can. He knew I was sick. Mm-hmm. Other guys were at the game. I was the one in the office. I had the office shift that day. And I was just like, oh, man. And you just felt you're not going to get out of there, But it's just one of those things. And the two of us kind of, the only other time I've had a moment of ESP is when he walked round the desk and I said, "I'm not doing it." He said, "No, you are doing it. Trust me, you'll love it." And he said, "Describe 242 Henrik Larsson goals," which I did for the pull-out when Henrik left. So that was a labour of love. That was a wee bit more enjoyable. But, you did it. It's what you had to do as a journalist. You think Celtic are going to win the title and they blow it. And Rangers win the title and your boss says, "Has to be done." You're just like, "Right, okay, keys, leave it with me." And, so it's your job. I had no qualms about it, but I felt sick to the pit of my stomach that Celtic had blown it. And he knew that, Scotty knew that. And he just said to me, in terms of professionalism, he said, "Fantastic." And he once said during that, the Beast from the East and all those storms, and when cars were abandoned in the M8 and all that, and there's snow, mm-hmm. He said there's 3 certainties in life. He says there's death, there's taxes, and Tony Haggerty will make his work, because I was the only one that made it in that day.
Is that right?
Aye. And he went, "It's you and me against the world." And I was like, "Okay." And he went, "By the way," he said, "my money's on us." I was like, "Right, okay, let's get the paper out." And we did, and and that's it's just what you do. You adapt to situations. But yeah, I mean, every Celtic supporter hates Helicopter Sunday. But imagine being a journalist, right? A Celtic-minded journalist and having to rewrite the whole pull-out for a Rangers perspective.
But you see, you fast forward now, Tony, and you are sitting there with green and white trainers, having driven a green car to this interview, wearing a green top, are they green jeans? And green tinted spectacle frames.
Got them from a wedding.
And you're now writing about Celtic. Nobody's going to come to you and tell you to write about a victory
I know.
for any other team rather than Celtic.
Yeah.
And you look at that now and you think, wow, that's the dream job, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I've said before, 25 years at the coalface to become an overnight sensation, you know, or an overnight whatever. Add the, delete is appropriate, you know, so, but yeah, it's something, and I'm going to put this on record. I've told you this off air, and I got a career back. I left the Daily Record in 2019 October, and I took voluntary redundancy. I went back to Glasgow Uni to do teaching English to secondary school kids, and I didn't enjoy the experience. And in between times, I was appearing on Acsom and being as passionate as I was talking about Celtic the way I did, and people were liking what I did. And so Newsquest, the Herald noticed, and they asked me to come and work for the Celtic way, which is what I do now. That dream job that you talk about, writing and talking about Celtic every day. But that wouldn't have came about if it wasn't for yourself and Acsom, because, and the reason I did that was, this is how we met. People don't know that.
Yeah.
I came along to an event that you and Kevin held in the penalty spot. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I think Jackie Mack and Tom Boyd.
That's right.
Memory serves. So in come the SMSM.
Well attended that day.
Yeah, it was well attended.
Yeah.
So we all troop in, and I don't know who. There was a crowd there. Somebody said something disparaging towards the SMSM. Fine, we're used to it all our life. But it annoyed me, and I waited till the very end when all the journalists had gone away, and I walked in, and I remember saying, "I'm Tony Haggerty, here's my card," and I handed it to you. And I said, "You can think what you want about journalists," I says, "but some of us have a similar state of mind." I said, "Not all." I says, "Can't speak for them all." I says, "But I'm speaking for myself." I said, "And some of them actually support the club, but you do too." I said, "So we don't all have a hidden agenda. We're not all bad guys. We're not all whatever." And you went, "Tony, I'm Paul John Dykes. I'm involved in a Celtic State of Mind podcast. Would you like to appear on that?" And I was like, "Oh wow." And I wasn't sure if the record would let me, that kind of thing. But we kept in touch ever since then, because I said, if you're going to have any more events like these, I would like to turn up on behalf of the newspaper. Let me know. And we kept in touch then. So that's how we met. And we seemed to hit it off because we were quite similar. Both hopeless romantics about Celtic and like music stuff and all that kind of, and fashion and all that kind of, well, people argue to us whether I like fashion or not, but that's neither here nor there. But, and then when I left the record, I wanted to stay involved. And I asked you, I remember phoning you up and saying, "Can I come on the podcast?" And you were like, "Great, what you doing?" I'm like, hee-haw, I'm studying to be a teacher. I'd like to come on. And we come on in the worst season
I know.
in living memory, where Celtic loaded 10. And the antidote to that was what you said at the top of the programme. As a jest, I started talking about a Celtic team who were rip-roaring, free-scoring and never boring. And that just struck a huge chord with Celtic supporters. And I've said this before as well. It's a guy called Jim Cullen who ran the Montrose Bar, which was just opposite the Daily Record back in the day. And every time we went in, Jim was just a larger-than-life character. Great. As I once said, a good Celtic man, to which my response was, "Are there any other kind?" And every time we would walk in, he knew we were the journalists for the Record, he would say, "How's the all-scoring, free-flowing, rip-roaring, never-boring Glasgow Celtic?" Something to that effect. And it was always the same greeting, and he knew I was a Celtic man, so we would just laugh. And it stuck with me, and I always felt there'd be a time when I'd be able to use it. And I always said that I refined it. Jim had a longer saying, but I kind of refined it, and people jumped onto that, they liked it, and it became synonymous with Acsom.
That season.
That season, because Celtic were everything but the rip-roaring, free-scoring, never boring, or were the uninspiring, misfiring, perspiring Glasgow Celtic, I think, at one point. And, you know, and people seem to like what you said. I remember we had a go at the Celtic board when I turned the Holy Prayer round, started talking about where there was harmony, they brought discord, and people seemed to like that. And then I had and I'll never top the 5 minutes that I did talking about King Kenny and Hillsborough on the Friday show with Laura Bradburn and Jim Orr. I still get people to this day saying, my goodness, just a stream of conscious 5 minutes. And do you know what? These are moments in time which we talk about you're very proud of, things that you do in your career. And I'm very proud of that particular podcast. Every now and again, it'll flash up and, you know, I just think, wow, you catch a moment in time.
You do.
You know, and we caught a moment in time that season because throughout the negativity, we ended up winning 3 awards.
I know.
You know what I mean? There's just
We won a treble. Acsom won a treble that season.
Celtic won, Acsom won a treble, and then you say to yourself, how can something in a personal and your own personal life, how can something good come out of something so bad? Because you would have traded that. You would have traded those awards for Celtic, 10, being a winning team of the 10. But people seem to, you know, catch on or latch on to what I and many other contributors were saying during that season, and they liked it. And I know that being part of the Scottish mainstream media, you polarise opinion, you divide opinion, and I get that, but I always try and bring my A game to the table. I always try and, you know, make managers think with questions, you know, if I can, you know. And you're talking about relationships. I don't think Ange had any kind of relationship with the media guys.
Still don't think he does.
But yeah, but I once got told that the guy with the green glasses makes him think when he's asking him a question. Because I didn't want to waste his time. I didn't want the mate treatment. Got it once, you know, but learned from it. And I have a wonderful relationship with the current manager. You know, I think he has a healthy respect for what we do for a living. And, you know, he's so courteous to the point where he does name check you sometimes. And
I've noticed that.
yeah, and he'll give you full and honest answers to your questions, which, you know, as a journalist, that's something that, you know, and like yourself, I've never had that one-to-one time with him. And I think it goes back to the time when he was doing in the Hydro, on the launch of his book, and we were doing a European preview for one of the games. I think it was PSG, can't remember off the top of my head. But just prior to him going to speak in front of 10,000 or more people, I asked him to sign the book to my father, and I asked him to put to Danny commitment. Just put commitment. That's all. I says, my father will understand. And he just said, can't leave me hanging like that, Tony, what's commitment? So I told him the story of my father running the amateur team where all the players were from Kilmarnock, Parkhead and surrounding areas. They were all Celtic and Rangers supporters, but they were a highly successful amateur football team. He pulled up a chair and he started moving things around and talking about this football team who, prior to 2 minutes before, he hadn't heard of at all. And we sat for about 15, 20 minutes, and for me it was just like, Celtic manager, he's revered, and he's talking about my father's football team, and I've told that was the motto, and the badge was a scarf draped round a ball with commitment on it, and he just loved that. And I happened to mention that whenever a work experience kid went to Celtic Park and Brendan Rodgers was the manager, he'd stop in fact, he wouldn't even start it. It'd be, there's a new face, and he would spend 10 minutes talking to them, asking their favourite player, what school they go to, what their favourite subjects, and, you know, just making chit-chat. Just a brilliant PR exercise. He just knew what to do in those situations. And I always thought, imagine being that kid going home to your mother and father that night what did you do today, son? I went to the Celtic press conference as work experience, and Brendan Rodgers spoke to me. Did he say hello? No, he spoke to me.
Yep.
He gave them.
He was engaged.
And he was like, never mind them. He's like, and I, that time when he spoke about my father's football team, I regressed to a wee boy at school. I was just like, I was kind of, oh wow, you know, and I understood how, you know, kids would have felt in that moment. Because the first thing I did when I was, Dad, Brendan Rodgers spoke about the Millerfield, you know. He's like, sorry? And I'm like, look, commitment. So he was laughing, you know. And so ever since then, the relationship's been, but that doesn't mean that I've not been critical of him, because I have, and I always will be, if I think something that, you know, if I think strongly enough about something that maybe he's been, you know, carry the can for, let's say, or if he gets his team selection and all that kind of stuff, I'll always be, objective that way. But I mean, I enjoy a decent enough relationship with, but I think he enjoys a decent enough relationship with most guys in the press. I mean, the last question I asked him was about the miracle in ice and the miracle in Medina and Leicester City's miracle.
Yeah.
And I kind of couched it and said the miracle of Munich had a nice, or the miracle in Munich had a nice ring to it, and he seemed to quite like that thought process. You know, he's
You're
very
painting
big
a
on that.
picture, though.
Yeah.
You're not just saying everybody fit for the night, Brendan. You're painting a picture, you know.
You know, and I was giving him like sporting success stories against the odds. That was the kind of thrust of the question. And, you know, and staring him down, and then in terms of looking at him as he's giving the answer, I kind of knew. I did say to everybody, I even said it on the Celtic Way podcast, that Celtic would have a moment in Munich when the dream was alive, not, you know, well and truly alive, and it was on, and they came so close. I even said it on Five Live Drive. They asked me my thoughts, and I said, listen, I said, mark my words, I said, Celtic will be in this, and there will be and the presenter said, hopefully we get you back on tomorrow to talk about it. I was like, so do I hope, you know. And but you know, they came close, but no cigar. But I mean, I don't know, in terms of relationships with football people, I've been pretty fortunate in that I've never really had a fallout with anybody, you know, and I include protagonists and managers and players from the other side of the city. I think when you have that common bond of football, who they play for's immaterial. You know, you can always communicate through football.
The universal language of football.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. You
Yeah,
know,
without a doubt.
And it's, you know, I'm not the greatest journalist Scotland's ever produced. I strive to be every day. And then I read McIlvanney and I think I'm playing at it. You know, but it's one of some of the advice I give to student journalists, that, you know, as long as I wake up the next day and be a better journalist than the day before, I always strive for that if I can. And again, you know, you were asking about, you know, having the background working for the Daily Record and then now working for the Celtic Way, you know, which is an associate of the Herald News Quest. It draws its own criticism or its own kind of opinions. I can't control that. I can't control what people think of you, whether it be on YouTube or whatever, or any other social media platform. So I try not to invite it into my life. As you can see, I'm pretty happy-go-lucky. I don't take myself that seriously, you know. And well, I like to think I don't, but I take my job seriously because I love it, and it's arguably why I've been a journalist for almost 30 years, give or take. So, and it never loses its appeal.
No, and the thing is, you've moved with the times, Tony. And that's a big thing that a lot of people struggle to do. You're going from the mainstream and you're on a platform now that's using things that are at the forefront of media. So fair play to you, and it's great, and it always is great to get you back on the Celtic State of Mind. And we will do it again, hopefully to talk about European progression. All that's left for me to say today though, Tony Haggerty, thanks for joining me once again on A Celtic State of Mind.
An absolute pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for joining us once again on A Celtic State of Mind. Join us next Friday at 6 o'clock for This is Acsom.